Welcome to the Exploress, time traveling through women's history, one era at a time. I'm Kate Armstrong. Viking King Gotrek is moping. He was once a generous and fair ruler, but that was before his beloved queen died. Now he spends his days sitting by her grave, talking to her corpse. Oh, honey. With no one at the helm, his kingdom is beginning to fall into disrepair. His people beg him to remarry, and so he proposes, reluctantly, to the beautiful and wise Ingeborg of Norway. But her father is already negotiating her marriage to a far younger king. Unsure what to do about it, Ingeborg's father says, "I can avoid this hassle if I let her choose her own husband, as she's asked me before." Great idea, Dad. Ingeborg decides on the older king, because while he may still miss his first wife, he's proven that he can rule well. The younger king is untested. Explaining her reasoning to her father, she says, "It's a bad idea to bet on hopes." Today, we're going to explore a woman's place in Viking society. Specifically, we're going to dive into the world of courtship and marriage. And, with the help of some of the queens from the Sagas, we're going to find out what the Norse thought the ideal woman should be. Lucky for us, we have two special guests on this journey. Eleanor Barraclough, a historian and broadcaster whose book Embers of the Hands explores what life is like for everyday Vikings, and Nancy Marie Brown, who's been studying and writing about Vikings, warrior women in particular, for decades. So, grab your rune sticks and a couple of birds. That'll make sense later. Let's go traveling. But first, a shout out to some of my patrons. My newest pirate queen, Jennifer. My newest lady presidents, Sarah and Lisa. My warrior queens, Maureen, MCF, Gail, Christina, Sarah, Amanda, Ika, June, Neve and Sloan, Kate, Jessie, and Alexis. My imperial empresses, Sally, Letitia, Teresa, Samara, and Faye and Whimsy Soapworks. And my lady pharaohs, Kimberly, Lori, Cheryl, Kat, Laura, Bridget, Sophie, Kate, and the fabulous Courtneys. Other than listening and sharing, there's no better way to support this show than by becoming a patron. You'll get access to bonus episodes, including full interviews with both of our guests and extra Viking stories. To find out all about it, just go to theexploress.com and click on Become a Patron. Before we begin, a content warning. This episode contains some discussions of sexual violence, so if that's not for you or some little ears you might be sitting next to, you might want to sit this one out. In our last episode, we talked about how the Vikings are actually quite egalitarian when it comes to gender roles. As we plunge into discussions of the ideal Norse woman, it's worth repeating that here again. From everything we know, it seems as if roles aren't segregated based on gender, at least not in a serious way. The Norse care most about who you are, what resources you have, and what skills you possess. And they aren't afraid to give a woman some power. Men aren't the only ones getting on boats and sailing off to find glory. In a future episode, we'll talk about how women also went a raiding. But for now, let's talk about the women left at home. Turns out, we have quite a lot to manage in the absence of the menfolk, especially queens and elite heads of households, who are in charge of sometimes hundreds of souls. Here's Nancy.
This woman would have been in charge of a very large number of other people and a very large number of jobs that she'd have to oversee. She was more like the CEO of a company, not just a housewife. So we know of people in the 1200s, and the number of people that they were responsible for is in the hundreds. So she would be overseeing all of the planting and the sowing and the, threshing of grain if you're in a place that grows grain, which they didn't in Iceland. All of the keeping of animals, the butchering, the preserving of meat, all of the making of cloth and clothing, which was an enormous project because they made everything from scratch.
The Sagas mention many intelligent and powerful Norse women, some of whom we'll meet later. And we know that Viking society isn't necessarily holding us back. But that doesn't mean it's always fair to the ladies. Take, for example, our romantic lives. How much agency and choice do we have when it comes to who we marry? The Vikings aren't a particularly romantic sort of people. Marriage is seen as a contract between families that ultimately helps ensure everyone's survival. It's not the stuff of star-crossed dreams.
Marriage was not considered something to do with romance or love. It was not controlled by the church until after the year 1000, certainly, and really not until the 1200s. So in the heart of the Viking Age, we're talking 750 to 1050, marriage was an economic contract between families or clans.
So, if you're harboring fantasies of running away with that hunky blacksmith, tough luck, girl. That doesn't mean you can't flirt with him a little, though. We do have some evidence of Norse courtship, which comes down to us in the form of runes. Here's Eleanor.
So there's a wonderful one. It's from Norway, really small, and it just says Åsa loves st, and st being the start of a man's name, and so this is a woman loves blah, and then another hand on the same sort of runic inscription says jeg vet or ek vet, which means like I know. So clearly whoever st is not any great secret,
Runes also show us more complex potential dramas, sometimes involving more than one man.
This is a runic inscription that's found underneath the floorboards in a stave church in Norway. So stave church means Christianity. But it's been dropped, possibly, it seems intentionally, and it seems to be on the women's side. So I've got to think, okay, so a woman has dropped this through the floorboards. She's trying to hide it. And this is sort of confirmed when you then look at the inscription, and it's about 3 people. So this is an inscription from around 1300. We're talking late, and it seems to be a message from a man called Håvard. And we don't know who he's writing to other than Gu. So it might be Guðni, Gunhild, something like that. Now, the reason we don't know is because she's tried to scratch out the names, and she's also tried to scratch out another man's name, also on the inscription, called Kolbein. And he's basically, Håvard is saying, it is my full intention to marry you, unless you are still thinking about marrying Kolbein, if you prefer him. And so she's, we assume, being handed this note, like in the back of the class during mass.
Do you like me? Check yes or no.
Yes, it's exactly that. But of course, because she scribbled out the names, you're thinking, is she embarrassed? Is this just like, oh God, he's still asking, this is absolutely awful? Or is there some level of secrecy here that she needs to maintain? Is she going to get into trouble if people know that these 2 men are interested in her? We just don't know.
Another romantic high note, it seems we're not as concerned about chastity as in some other places. If you happen to do the horizontal cha-cha with someone out of wedlock, it's not going to ruin you for life, necessarily.
Having a child out of wedlock was not considered an awful thing. A lot of girls, had babies before they were married, and that didn't ruin their chances. They were still, if they came from the right family, they were still able to marry well.
But let's say you don't want to get pregnant with that handsome blacksmith. What might you do to prevent it? What sorts of contraception are we dealing with here?
So this is always a problem. It would be a problem now. It is a sort of hidden area of just world history, and that's partly because women tend to not be in positions of power, and it's also the nature of what it is. It's what's going to survive. So contraception, for example, well, we know what sort of herbs would have been around at that time and what then may have been sort of available for that, but we don't actually have any sources talking about it. It's not like sort of later, leech books or, sort of early modern sources where we might have hints of the sort of things you might go and get yourself to sort yourself out.
Ugh, why doesn't anyone write these things down? Didn't they know I was going to need them later? Now we move on to a less sexy fact. Girls can be betrothed as early as 13 years old. Yikes. Although the actual marriage is often delayed until she turns 16. It's quite normal for brides to be in their mid-teens, though, and for grooms to be much older, in their 20s or 30s, we hope. But there are certainly many situations in which our groom turns out to be a 50-year-old man. Cute, Grandpa! This phenomena, whilst icky, is pretty standard for the medieval world. The tiny bright spot in all of this is that if you hate your super ancient husband, he'll probably kick the bucket soon anyway. So, hang on tight. Many Norse women become widows a number of times throughout their lives, and that can be advantageous. Here's Eleanor.
A woman would likely be told who she was marrying, at least when she was young, but it looks like then if she married later on, she had more power. If she was a widow remarrying, she has a lot more control at that point.
Do we have any say in who we marry? Not really. Brides-to-be aren't part of the negotiations. But to be fair, grooms-to-be aren't either. In Njál's Saga, a dad takes his foster son aside and says,
"I would like to arrange a match for you and find you a good wife."
The boy replies,
"See to it, foster father. I will agree to whatever match you make."
Marriages are meant to be strategic alliances. We gals don't have a lot of sway in who we marry, but I suppose it is some comfort to know our gentleman counterparts are in the same boat.
You will notice that the men don't have any choice either. Some of the most eloquent sagas tell us of young men who are too poor or too low in status to marry the woman of their choice. And many of them go off to Norway to make a name for themselves so they can come back and impress the woman's family. And by the time they come home, they find that their beloved has been married off to somebody else. Sometimes the feud starts, sometimes they have an affair, sometimes they even have a child together. There's a couple of really nice stories about that. In the end, they all die. It's not going to be a happy ending.
The most common scenario is that two Norse dads get together, probably over some glasses of mead, and decide that it'll be a great idea for their son and daughter to marry, hash out the details, and draw up a contract. In the Norse world, dowries are not paid by the bride's family, as was common in Tudor England, for example. Instead, the groom's family pays the bride's family a bride price. The woman's family is offering up their daughter's reproductive potential here, and the man's family is quite literally paying for it. Lovely. So, these dads will negotiate a bride price, figure out where the couple will live, and decide on the time, place, and date of the wedding. Yup, if you're a Viking lady, your wedding is gonna be planned by Dad. At least you won't have to bother yourself picking out the flowers or the napkins, if that's not your thing. We Viking ladies do have the right to inherit and own property, but we don't have the right to choose our husband. One day, you're single and free as a bird, and the next, your daddy comes home and informs you that your marriage is set for next Tuesday. Occasionally, a woman might be asked how she feels about her prospective husband, but that doesn't seem to be the norm. Viking dads just aren't overly concerned about things like consent. In Njál's Saga, again, we meet a girl named Pjorgadir, who is 14 when she attends her mother's third wedding to a man named Gunnar. At the feast, Gunnar's uncle, Prain, a much older man, starts being a creep and ogling Pjorgadir. His wife gets angry and calls him out on it, rightly so, and he divorces her right then and there and has her kicked out of the feast. He then immediately approaches Pjorgadir's grandfather to ask for her hand. Honestly, the audacity of this utter turdwaffle. Granddad is unsure about whether or not he should hand off his granddaughter to the Viking equivalent of that creepy guy at Denny's who follows you out to the parking lot, but then he learns that Prain is very rich. Well then. Granddad decides this proposal is a great idea. He negotiates a marriage contract, and bam! 14-year-old Porgadir is now married to the ancient Prain. The marriage is praised by everyone in the saga as a brilliant match. Absolutely zero side-eye. What does Porgadir think? We'll never know. Nobody asked her. So what if you're in Porgadir's shoes and you don't want to marry someone who looks like a lumpy man-shaped pile of pudding? You can complain about it to your dad, but your father's word is law. You can't refuse to obey him. If you're really bent out of shape about your prospective beau, you might be able to delay things a smidge, but ultimately, you are walking down that aisle whether you like it or not. After all, this marriage isn't really about you. It's about the joining of two families. You, my darling, are a means to an end. And yet the sagas are full of stories in which bold women protest being married off. In Njal's saga, Njal tries to marry his foster son, Höskuldr, off to Hildegunnar, who refuses to marry him until he's made a chieftain. Her tactic works. Her marriage is delayed, while Njal goes to the court to get Höskuldr recognized as a chieftain. Once that's done, she agrees to the marriage. Astridr Tryggvason also tries this tactic. When her brother, who is also the king, tries to marry her off to someone she feels is beneath her station, she refuses to consent until he gives her future husband a higher rank worthy of her. Her brother gets so angry at her disobedience that he steals one of her pet hawks and plucks its feathers out one by one until she concedes. We don't like animal torturers here, sir. Both of these women knew that the one acceptable avenue to refusing a marriage has to do with proving the prospective parties aren't of the same status. Marriage is supposed to be a reciprocal agreement between two families of the same standing, with each bringing an equal value to the alliance. If a suitor's proposal is turned down by a woman's father, it's usually because he considers them too low-born or poor. In one saga, a father laments that no man is rich enough to afford his daughters. That situation is far better, of course, than the alternative. Poor girls usually have no marriage prospects, confining them to working as laborers for the rest of their lives. Tale as old as time. In one legend, Sigrun, a Valkyrie, is so disgusted by the man chosen for her that she calls him a kitten, a slur that is very similar to one from our time involving a certain part of the female anatomy, which basically questions his courage and masculinity. Sigrun approaches the best warrior of the group, who also happens to be the best looking, Helgi, and asks him to challenge her fiancé for her hand. Her brother is very angry at this turn of events, but ultimately agrees that Sigrun can marry Helgi. After all, there's no denying that Helgi is a good hero and a straight-up tasty treat, and a Valkyrie deserves a warrior as mighty as she is. Here's the good news. Although it isn't strictly necessary, many of the sagas do stress the importance of getting a woman's consent before marrying her off. There are many cautionary tales of what happens when a woman is forced down the aisle, so it's likely that many fathers do at least try to choose someone acceptable to their daughters. Even the Vikings recognize that happy wife, happy life is the key to a successful marriage. So what do we need to think about in terms of being considered a good wife? What qualities do the Vikings prize in their ladies? Beauty is a given, but more importantly, hard work, intelligence, and initiative are the most valued traits by far. How do we know? It's all there in the sagas. Within their pages are tales of many powerful, outspoken women, though the writers don't always want us to think that's a good thing.
The Christian writers defamed women who were intelligent and powerful, and they come across as being really somebody you don't want to spend time with. But if you think, okay, what was that woman trying to do, and who was benefiting from what she did, you see that they really were powerful, intelligent, important women who just disagreed with their husband, and the writer took the husband's side. So they may have had more power than we really see in some of the sagas. They may have had more influence.
We meet queens who are persuasive, politically savvy, assertive, wise, and sometimes incredibly cutthroat. Let's start with Åsa, the daughter of King Harald Redbeard. She's about to give us a masterclass in how revenge is a dish best served cold. When King Gudrod asked for Åsa's hand in marriage, her father refused his suit because he knew his daughter didn't want to marry him. Gudrod apparently didn't know the meaning of the word no because he decided to launch a surprise attack against Åsa's kingdom. Åsa's father and brother were killed in the fighting, and Åsa was captured and assaulted by Gudrod. She soon became pregnant, and she also became Gudrod's queen, so that's fine. But Åsa was not the forgiving type. When her son was 1 year old, Åsa decided to get some stone-cold revenge. She and Gudrod had just docked their ship at a chieftain's estate. On the side, she told her errand boy to hide in the forest near the dock with a spear. That night, she got her husband good and drunk. When he left the ship that night to find a woman to sleep with, like she knew that tomcat would, Åsa's errand boy killed him. In the morning, Gudrod's bodyguards discovered that the killer was an employee of the queen. When they interrogated her, she didn't even try to deny it. She simply gathered her son, commandeered the royal ship, and sailed straight to her old homeland, where they welcomed her as King Harald Redbeard's rightful heir. She then ruled the hell out of that kingdom for 17 years, all on her own, before passing the reins to her son. Love this for her. Queen Åsa is praised for keeping her emotions in check and shrewdly playing the long game. Meanwhile, Queen Olga of Kiev liked to wear her heart right on her sleeve. And when someone broke that heart, she wasn't afraid to destroy them. Her husband, King Igor, funded his military campaigns by collecting tribute from Slavic tribes, and he sent the bulk of his army home with that tribute. He still had to collect from the town of Iskoriston, though, so he took a few warriors with him to pick up the money, at which point the Drevlian tribe promptly killed him. When they realized they had accidentally killed the king, an oh shit moment if ever there was one, they sent their 20 best men by boat to Queen Olga to apologize. Hey, Your Royal Highness, so, funny story. The Drevlians took full responsibility for killing Igor, offered her blood money, and asked if she'd like to marry one of their princes instead. The queen graciously replied,
"Your proposal is pleasing to me. Indeed, my husband cannot rise again from the dead."
She said she'd consider their offer and told them to return to their ship in the meantime. Tomorrow, she'd send her people to carry them in their boat to her fortress, a mighty sign of honor, so they could speak again. That night, Olga had her minions dig a massive pit in the center of her fortress. In the morning, they carried the Drevlians all the way to that fortress and unceremoniously dumped them in the pit. Damn, Olga! They pleaded for mercy, of course, but Olga showed them none. She had them buried alive, in a parody of a royal Viking ship burial.
Olga peered in and
inquired whether they found the honor to be to their taste.
Eventually, when the Drevlian delegation didn't return to Iskoriston, they became concerned and sent a second delegation to Queen Olga. Big mistake. She graciously welcomed them and offered them the use of the royal sauna. How about a quick little steam, boys? Can you see where this is going? She sets fire to that sauna. Listen, I think Olga might be just a wee bit angry still. After roasting her enemies, quite literally, she sent a messenger to the people of Iskoriston with the following message.
"I am now coming to you, so prepare great quantities of mead in the city where you killed my husband, that I may weep over his grave and hold a funeral feast for him."
The Drevlians followed her orders, and Olga did indeed come to weep over his grave. And then, when everybody was drunk on mead, she ordered her army to kill them. Next, she took her army and waged war on all the other Drevlian lands until only one city was left standing. She besieged them for a whole year, but they refused to open their gates and surrender. Finally, they asked what tribute was required for peace. Olga replied she wanted each household to send her 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows. Weird request, but okay. What did she do with those birds? She had each soldier in her army attach a piece of sulfur wrapped in cloth to one of their legs. When night arrived, the birds were released to fly back to their various roosts, and the army's fiery arrows rained down upon the city, which went up in flames thanks to those very flammable birds. The survivors tried to flee, but they were quickly captured, killed, or enslaved. Great story, but Olga, that is extra. Now that the fiery birds of death had won Queen Olga the entirety of the Drevlian lands, her thirst for vengeance seems to have been quenched. She ruled the kingdom on her own for 10 years before her son came of age, and proved to be a very productive queen, now that she wasn't plotting murder all the time. Whilst on the throne, she established fortified towns and markets, created honey-making grounds and trading posts, and standardized laws and taxes. So she was brutal, but she also had mad organizational skills. We all really do contain multitudes. But being excellent at revenge isn't the only trait the Sagas celebrate Viking queens for. The most common roles they play in the Sagas are that of trusted advisor, wise counsel, and loyal partner. Queens are valued for their emotional intelligence and political knowledge. It's always the women, not the men, who have the ability to read runes, practice magic, interpret dreams, navigate complicated political situations, heal interpersonal relationships, and remain logical enough to prevent unnecessary violence. In one story, Queen Ingigerd could see the future in her dreams and warned her husband, King Eirik of Uppsala, not to insult Hrolf, a young king seeking their daughter's hand in marriage. The king, of course, doesn't listen, insults Hrolf, and then sheepishly goes to his wife to explain.
Well, that's turned out badly.
She replies. When he shares that Hrolf now plans to attack them, she warns.
It would be hard to contend against him in any contest, since he has the backing of the Danish king, his foster father, King Hring, with whom he discusses everything.
Ingigerd gives her advice, and this time he listens. The moral of the story? Listen to your wife, man! In another tale, King Gotrek and King Hring, once the best of bros, become suspicious of one another when rumors start circulating that the other is going to attack. Luckily, their queens are right by their sides to set them straight. Hring's wife tells him,
That's foolish talk. You've long been best of friends. Will you now listen to evil tongues and break up your friendship?
She then tells him to sail to Gotrek's kingdom in a single boat, to have a heartfelt face-to-face renewal of the royal bromance, and suggests that he offer to foster Gotrek's son. So Hring gets in a boat and sails to Gotrek, who, seeing Hring sail up, immediately thinks he's being attacked. His queen lets him blabber on for a while with his paranoid monologue. Then she replies,
There's little wisdom in that diatribe. Look at it this way. Would King Hring come here with so few followers if he no longer trusted you?
Cutting, but effective. She then suggests they welcome him with a feast and keep an eye on him. And thus the besties are reunited and war is averted. Way to go, ladies. Loyalty is one of the most important traits for Viking women to possess, and there is perhaps no better paragon of loyalty than Alder Vesteinsdottir, the wife of the hero in the Gisla Saga Sursonar. The hero, Gisli, is an outlaw and a convicted murderer. It was for a good reason, don't worry. And he and Alder are now on the run, roughing it in a remote hut with their foster daughter. The family is finally discovered by Eyjolfr, a seedy farmer moonlighting as a bounty hunter. Alder tells her husband to hide, and she goes to greet Eyjolfr, who offers her a massive bag of silver if she'll give up Gisli's location. In a shocking twist, Alder agrees to betray her husband, only if she can count the coins first. Once she's done that, she suddenly swings the bag towards Eyjolfr's face, breaking his nose in one of the most FU moments of any saga. As his nose gushes blood, Alder says viciously,
Take that now for your gullibility. There was never any hope that I would render my husband into your hands, you evil man. Take this now for your cowardice and your shame, and remember, you wretch, for as long as you live, that a woman has struck you.
Eyjolfr calls Alder a cowardly dog and screams at his men to arrest her, but they refuse, and it turns out they're so embarrassed that he got beaten by a girl that they abandon the mission entirely. taking no prisoners and unafraid to give a guy a facer. Alder is basically every Viking man's dream. It's kind of odd, isn't it? The Vikings expect their women to be obedient when it comes to accepting a marriage proposal, but they want them to be clever, bold, and outspoken in all other aspects of life. Why do all of these sagas celebrate such multifaceted women and queens, all of whom act as role models for actual Norse women? Wouldn't they have been better served by telling stories of women who never rebelled or stood up for themselves? It's actually quite important that Norse women be valued for being hardworking, ambitious, and independent, even if it does cause their fathers and husbands grief from time to time. Why? Because women can speak in assembly proceedings, and often have to on behalf of their husbands when they're away. As we know, they can also inherit and own land, and run large farms and estates by law. Most significantly, they have to defend themselves in their homes and keep society running smoothly for months at a time. Viking men have no use for an obedient woman. They need a strong one who can hold her own. And that's why, for example, when Queen Alogia ruled Novgorod with her husband, King Vladimir, she kept
half of the warband, providing for the warriors at their own expense, and assessing whatever taxes and tribute she needed to cover it. Her warband was no smaller than the king's, and they were often in competition for the best warriors.
In the sagas, queens have plenty of influence and power, and we Norse ladies see ourselves reflected in them. And yet, in many ways, this is still a patriarchal society, which means, inevitably, that a woman's honor and reputation, not to mention that of her family, is inextricably linked to her virginity. While we know that plenty of ladies are getting jiggy with it before marriage, at least on paper, the men in their family are not going to be happy about it. Not on my watch. It's up to them to guard your sexual purity, and this is a job they take annoyingly seriously. Remember Gisli, Alder's husband and the convicted murderer? He murdered a man because he heard a rumor that he'd been flirting with his sister. This isn't as nuts as it seems. It's Icelandic law that any man who finds another man in bed with any of his female relatives, wife, daughter, mother, whatever, has the right to kill him, no questions asked. And if an unmarried woman becomes pregnant, by law, her baby daddy is responsible for both the mother and the child. If the woman refuses to tell her male relatives who impregnated her, perhaps to save him from being, murdered or beaten up, her male relatives are legally allowed to beat her until she gives up the name. As long as they leave no lasting injuries or visible marks. It seems it's never really been about protecting women. Many are beaten and sexually assaulted in the sagas, and we never learn how they felt about that. Instead, it's always about defending the honor of the family. A woman is considered in some ways property, and she cannot be damaged. If she is, she becomes an outcast. The Bardar saga mentions the story of Helgi, a girl far from home. First, she is abducted by a chieftain, who makes her his concubine. When he tires of her, a farmhand tries to rape her while she's asleep. Helgi successfully defends herself, but she is still deemed ruined, and spends the rest of her life living with mountain trolls, which honestly probably seems preferable, given what she'd been through. It's interesting that, according to their laws, Vikings clearly understand the concept of consent. There are laws against unwanted touching, and the punishments vary depending on which part of the body a man touches, as well as laws about getting a woman pregnant out of wedlock. Sexual assault are illegal, with punishments varying depending upon the social status of those involved. But Helgi, a poor former concubine, is on the lowest rung of society's ladder, and so no one bats an eye when someone attempts to rape her. Enslaved women, servant women, and poor, low-born women are all treated as sexually available objects to be used by high-born men. Wealthy, high-born women, however, are to be protected. If they're assaulted, their attacker will face the harshest punishment possible. Similarly, high-born men are less harshly punished for their crimes than low-born ones. Isn't it always the way? The laws can also tell us about domestic violence amongst the Vikings. Based on how brutally specific these laws are, we know that domestic violence must have been pretty common. There are punishments for inflicting face injuries, the loss of an eye, limbs that have been broken so badly that it's impossible to work, and so on. There is even a special category of domestic violence punishment for wounds that have penetrated the bone marrow or brain. The fact that this happened often enough it had to be written down and given its own special punishment is pretty horrifying. Marital rape is heavily punished, and in the sagas, domestic violence is often used as a foreshadowing device. Whenever a character harms his wife, he usually gets his comeuppance in one way or another. In the Saga of Burnt Njal, Gunnar slaps his wife's face during an argument. She warns him that he will regret it one day. Years pass, and when Gunnar is attacked at home by his enemies, his bowstring breaks in the fight, and he begs his wife to fix it. She refuses, reminding him of the slap, and watches impassively as he's killed. Get it, honey? So we can hope that a lot of Viking men are hearing these tales around the campfire and deciding that violence is not the best path. So we are lucky enough to be married to Tom Hiddleston, who looks amazing with his long hair all in braids, obviously, and he worships the ground we walk on. But what if you have a husband like Gunnar? Can you divorce him? Lucky for us, absolutely. Divorce is pretty common in the Norse age. After all, the mountain giantess Skadi and the sea god Njord get a divorce in the myths after realizing they can't agree on where to live. Both a husband and wife can initiate a divorce. All you need is 5 witnesses to do it. Common reasons for divorce include a man's inability to provide, domestic violence, failure to consummate, a woman's unruliness, and simple dissatisfaction. Adultery can also be listed as a reason, but for most people, that is so common that it isn't really grounds for splitting up. In the poem Loki's Quarrel, the trickster god Loki begins to insult every single god at a feast, loudly listing their sexual conquests and affairs, which include accusing Frigg of sleeping with all of Odin's brothers, and Freya of sleeping with every god in the room. The thing is, every one of these accusations is true, but no one really seems to care about it. Njord tells Loki calmly,
"Oh, there's little harm, though ladies get themselves a man, a boy on the side, or both."
It turns out wearing inappropriate clothing is also a valid reason for divorce. In one saga, a woman fed up with her husband tricks him into wearing a woman's shirt to initiate a divorce. All right. Impotence is similarly cited as a valid reason, although one couple in Njal's saga has the opposite problem. A guy named Hrútur has a dangling participle that is tragically cursed. In fact, his member is so gigantic that he can't physically penetrate his wife, which he has to prove to their 5 witnesses. That has to be awkward. What happens when your husband dies? As we know, many young girls are marrying much older men, and so becoming a widow is pretty common. In some of the other times and eras we've covered, widowhood can be a time of great freedom if you play your cards right. This is true for some Norse women, but sadly not all. The majority of widows will remarry for several reasons. First, although they're technically supposed to be allowed to reject suitors the second time around, the power dynamics between a woman and her father make this very unlikely. If your first husband dies, Dad will simply find you another one as soon as possible. Your dad's reason for doing so is practical. Running a household on your own is labor-intensive and financially fraught. Although you might have male laborers or slaves to help out, you're still at a disadvantage. A male head of house is also important for legal matters, and for the defense of you and your children. In one saga, the widow Grimma has a teenage daughter who's being seduced by a rakish poet named Pormadur, a well-known ladies' man, and people start to talk. Grimma tells him to marry her daughter or get lost. He ignores her, and without a husband to scare him away, Grimma turns to magic. She enchants her male slave, Kolbakkr, to chase after Pormadur with a sword the next time he shows up to flirt with her daughter. The poet is wounded badly enough he can't fight back. His reputation is destroyed, and he finally learns to keep it in his pants. Most widows, of course, don't have magical powers, if only, and so they simply remarry. Now listen, we have to talk about the elephant in the room here, by which I mean the extra wives. Many Viking marriages are polygynous, especially amongst the upper classes who can afford to support multiple women. To the surprise of no one, men are allowed as many wives as they like, but women are only allowed the one husband. Which is a bit of a shame. I mean, Tom Hiddleston is lovely, but have you seen Idris Elba? King Harold Fairhair, not to be confused with Harold Bedhead, obviously, was an especially prolific collector of wives. At one point, he had as many as 11, and was forced to divorce 9 of them before Ragnhildr, the daughter of a Danish king, would consent to become one of them. Similarly, when Harold proposes to Sigrid, a widowed queen, she turns him down, pointing out that he already has a wife. Harold claims that Asta isn't as high-born as Sigrid, but this super romantic declaration shockingly doesn't work, and she turns him down again. When he returns to persuade her with his warrior band, he finds that Sigrid is already hosting another king, who also wants to marry her. At this point, Sigrid is tired of the lot of them, so she gets everyone drunk, then sets fire to their sleeping quarters, killing both her suitors, in the hopes this will prevent any more from coming. Sigrid, that's a lot, but I like your style. Polygamy is so ingrained in Viking society that it continues even after Christianity takes hold. The Icelandic clergy actually protests the practice to no avail, and many Christian priests have been found buried with multiple wives in Iceland. If you can't beat 'em, join 'em, right boys? As if multiple wives aren't enough, a Viking man can also turn to concubinage, which is extremely common. This is a formal relationship outside a marriage, and is sometimes just for sexy time companionship, and other times used as a way to form alliances between powerful families. A man can have as many wives and concubines as he wants, but a woman can only be the wife or concubine of one man. If you become a concubine, you're considered spoken for and can no longer get married. Why would a father ever negotiate a situation in which his daughter becomes a concubine? Well, if you're a king's concubine and you get pregnant, your child could make a play for the throne. So that's one pretty tempting reason. The more common reason is simply that your father wants to play nice with the local chieftain, or the wealthy landowner, to gain some power and influence, and so he's offering you up on a silver platter. Thanks a lot, Dad. Our laws say that women can't be forced into concubinage, but being forced is a definite gray area. Men are the ones taking a dominant role in arranging these relationships, and there are many stories in the sagas of local chiefs or landowners kidnapping women or coercing tenants into giving them their daughters. Enslaved women are especially easy targets for this, and they definitely don't have much of a choice in the matter. The concept of polygamy and concubinage is important to understand, not just because it sucks for the ladies, even though it does, but because of the massive ramifications it has on Viking society. Think about it. You have a handful of wealthy, powerful men at the top of society, hoarding all the eligible women and all the land. That means there's not enough women or land left for everyone else. So you've got hundreds of restless men with no partner and no way to make money or gain status. What do you do to prevent them from turning on you? Why don't you encourage them to build a bunch of ships and tell them to go fight and raid and pillage and plunder abroad? Then, when they return, they'll bring back foreign loot, foreign money, and, most importantly, foreign women. Problem solved! But we'll talk about raiders in a future episode. Next time, we'll slide into a day in the life of a Viking lady. Everything from the layout of her house to what she's wearing, what she's eating, and a whole lot more. Until next time. Thanks for listening. If you dig The Exploress, and I hope you do, tell a friend about it, and leave me a rating and review wherever you listen. This really helps like-minded listeners find the show. Special thanks to Eleanor Barraclough and Nancy Marie Brown. You can find links to their books in the show notes. Thank you times a million to Carly Quinn, my co-creator, for her work researching and writing this series. To Joshua Stackhouse for my theme music, and Mr. Exploress, aka Paul Gablonsky, for my logo. The music in this episode is by Solas composer and Kevin Macleod. And thank you to the following for their vocal stylings: Melee and Isabel.